It's a great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Beverley Prevatt Goldstein, Coordinator of African Lives in Northern England. She is an activist and academic renowned for her work on social work practice, equalities, and the history and experiences of African communities in the UK. Over the past 50 years, surely not, Dr. Prevatt Goldstein has promoted anti-racist practice through her many publications. She's worked closely with community organisations, educational institutions, and government agencies to develop programmes and initiatives that promote equality and that celebrate African heritage. Her lecture this evening is entitled Discovering African Lives in Northern England.
It's wonderful to see so many people, and thanks to Newcastle Antiquaries for inviting me. I don't need to say anything about myself after such a lovely introduction. So if we start. So this very first slide, for me, it's important because in the middle, it says all the members of the organization, that we were 8 in August 2020. We then had 5 more, we then had 4 more. So in a sense, I'm standing here representing a large group of people. It also talks about all the organizations around us which has supported us. And, you know, pride of place goes to Newcastle Antiquaries and Simon, who has been a treasure in terms of the work he's done with us. So Newcastle Antiquaries made it possible for us to start by saying, if you lose this amount of money, we'll back you. And you needed that when we were a very small, unfunded group of people. So it was great having that support. Thanks to Sue for making the link with it. We've also got the Catholic Association of Racial Justice, and they put up money towards it and said, you have this and we'll buy so many of all your publications. So again, a great backer. We've also got Tyne Archives and Museums who've been with us all through, and as you know, particularly through Bill Griffiths, but through Rachel and Lizzie and so many people. And we have Historic England. And you might say, well, why did I put up this? It's too small for you to see. And the reason I put it up, 2 reasons. One is it makes it very clear that it is Northern England. It's not just Newcastle, that there are historic sites all over Northern England where African people have contributed. So that was one reason for putting it up. The other is that this was supported by Historic England and linked via Don. And it is on our website, it's on Historic England's website, and it's a marvelous resource, particularly for schools or children, grandchildren, wonderful questions and tasks for children. And it's all been sort of developed and overseen by 10-year-old children of African descent. So it's kind of very, very child-friendly. So I do suggest you look at it, and it would, because it really is something to be proud of. Oops. Sometimes they get confused. This one of the times? Shall we just do this one? Yes. Nope, it doesn't want to do it. Good thing I have a technical expert here. It just gets confused. You think it's whatever it was has changed, right? Okay, so African Lives in Northern England project, and you'll notice that it's slightly different to our website address. One of the reasons is that when we started, one of the very important sites we wanted to acknowledge was the Brough by Sands, where the first African settlement was. And we couldn't sort of squeeze that into the Northeast. So we had this sort of title of the Northeastern Cumbria. It was a bit cumbersome. So we said we'll just put Northern England. So people think it's Manchester and Birmingham and places like that, but it isn't. It really is the Northeastern Cumbria. It's just Northern England seemed to fit better. And we've put there 3 of our other publications. We've got the calendars, We've got the booklet, which is for sale. I hope you brought your money, only £5. The booklet's there. And we've got the walk. So those are 3 of our other publications. And although we're not going to dwell on the Umbrough by Sand and the Roman settlement, it is so important for us because it's what almost kick-started it. And it's there in all our calendars. It's there in our booklet. And we've even squeezed it into the walks in Newcastle because it's so important. And we do thank Bill Griffiths for his support for that. Let's see if it works right. So what I've got here is a list of the founding members. And it all started with Barbara Kentish and from Justice and Peace. I was at, this was during COVID, and I was at a workshop with her on Zoom. And she said she had links with Newcastle. And she said, is there still racism in Newcastle? I said, come and let's talk about this. Anyway, I met her in August 2020 in the park during COVID. And we thought, we had another link because Don had been working with NECA, Northeast of England African Community Association, about doing something about the Black residents in Newcastle. So when she said, shall we do something? What about a calendar? I thought, aha, this is it. Link into Northeast of England African Community Association. And we had David Faulkner, who was one of our supporters, Bill, who was connected through NECA, Don, of course, and Austin, Pat, and I were members of NECA. And then I thought we needed somebody else. So I knew Sue. So I contacted Sue, and that was our link into Newcastle Antiquaries. And Sue brought on board Sean Crichton and John Charlton, though he only stayed a little while. So all these, Justice and Peace, Northeast of England African and Caribbean Association, and Newcastle Antiquaries all moved forward into the African Lives in Northern England project. Now, what I'm not going to do now is dwell on people in great detail, which is why you have to buy the booklet and come on the walks. Because what I was asked to do was talk about how we discovered. So we're definitely not going to talk about the well-known people, the I.W. Wells, the Frederick Douglass, because we didn't have to do so much work to discover them. We're going to talk about the lesser-known people and just touch on them. So what I was thinking as I was planning it was that there was a discovery cycle. And this discovery cycle might be well known to many of you, but I found it quite interesting to sort of think it through, where it started with connections and relationships. That's where the discovery started. It then linked into the archives, and those were very interchangeable. We then have the organizations which contributed to it. We then have publications, and we ended with the website and the walks. So that's the sort of cycle we're going to come back to. And then if I just digress perhaps a little bit and talk about why we were doing it. And our aim, ever since that conversation between Barbara and myself and getting so many people on board, was to provide a different story, an alternative narrative to the history of Black, African and Asian diasporic in Northern England, focusing specifically on African. And I'll talk a little bit about why. And then what I've put is the kind of, having lived in the Northeast for, let me see, since 1990, so quite a long while, the kind of myths that I felt were kind of current, and the myths that we had to, not necessarily deliberately challenge, but put an alternative way of looking at it, an alternative perspective to what were the myths that were circulating, which I've put there. Black people are recent arrivals, their role is subordinate and peripheral. So that was the thinking between, let's provide a different story. And why did we focus on African? Partly because by Umbrough by Sand, the first African settlement, how could we not focus on African? And we also had, of course, Frederick Douglass and so we thought, okay, that's a good place to start. And why was it important? For us, it was about historical accuracy, getting closer to the truth. We don't think we've got the whole truth. We don't think we've got the final truth. All we are doing is trying to get closer to the truth. Recognition for African descendants in the Northeast. And of course, this was where it started, to challenge racism, that people of African descent are not guests, interlopers, not a burden, but builders, creators, inhabitants. And we also wanted it to be used as a model for challenging racism, demonstrating resilience, achievement, and also demonstrating working together across ethnicities, class, and gender. The last one I got from the school, they said, well, you know, and they celebrated and acknowledged the relevance of it. So I thought, yep, I changed the slide and I put that in. And the very first one we started was with Jimmy Durham. Now, you all may have heard of him. He may be very well known to you. But what was interesting was, if you look at the picture, the big one from the archives, and you see the little black boy in the middle, on the left of him was John Hughes, who was the grandfather of Barbara Kentish, from whom it all started. So it was a very personal connection. They both were in India together, in the Durham Light Infantry. They both returned to Durham together. They both went to Ireland together. There was only 3 years difference between them. And it was just, you know, just chance that Barbara's sister saw this picture and recognized the name Jack Hughes underneath and went on this trail and found out so much about her grandfather. So that's why it started. And I mean, why Jimmy Durham at all? Why is it so important to us? He's deemed to be the first Black soldier the first soldier of African descent in the regular army on the same terms as white recruits. Now, there's many more publications, more research going on. Was he the first? Was he the first African? We don't know. We think he might have been, but time will tell. But his story is just so interesting and tells us so much about race relations, that he was found on after a local dervish troop was attacked by the Durham Light Infantry. His father was killed by the Durham Light Infantry. His mother escaped with one child, and he got left behind. They thought he was 2 because somebody looked at his teeth, and somebody said, he must be about 2. They thought, and then one of the people who was dying from the dervish troops said, this little boy's name is Mustafa. They didn't call him Mustafa, they called him Jimmy Dervish, because he was, you know, it's the dervish troops, and he was kept as a regimental pet, which tells you something. On the other hand, he was, and they show half pictures of him being bathed, and so he was a regimental pet that they were fond of and gave money to keep when they could have left him in an orphanage. So you're looking at kind of complicated pictures of how people work together. So he played the clarinet and the violin in the band. He came back in 1902 to Durham. He married somebody in Durham, the sister of an army person in Bishop Auckland. He then went to Ireland. He died very soon after in 1910 of pneumonia. And there's lots of issues about how he related, knowing these were the people who killed his father, etc., etc. Lots of interesting things to think about. But in a sense, it all started because of that link with Barbara Kentish. He died 3 weeks before his daughter was born, only 27, I think. So the very next one, again, looking at information and how we get it. So now, Sean Crichton was very, very important in our starting because he had such a lot of knowledge, such a lot of information, and could link us into so much. So he would give us the names and we would rush away and try and find information on it during COVID, look, whatever we could find. So, and then we would go to Bill Griffiths from TWAM for a picture, or Newcastle Libraries and Archives. But those were our foundations. So he said, first Black doctor in Newcastle, Robert Wellesley Cole. Right, okay, we're gonna do, look at him. Got a book, great trouble from Northumbria Library because this was all in COVID when very little was available. Got a book. And then I just mentioned to somebody I knew from an African women's group, and she says, I have a cousin who's very interested in this kind of thing. So she connected me with a cousin, Iamide Thomas, who was central to the Creole group and the Creole national and international group. We could talk more about the Creole after. So E.M.A.D. Thomas then said, aha, I have a good friend who's the daughter of Robert Wellesley Cole. I said, right, okay, connect us. So she connected me to Patrice Wellesley Cole. And from that, I got so much more information about Robert Wellesley Cole and I got the pictures. And then reading the book, I think Sue and I looked at it and we said, hang on, he's got a sister who was in Newcastle. And we haven't got enough women in all this thing. Like, the sister's important. And Patrice says, well, my cousin, her son, would you like to contact him? Right, so I was there. Contacted the son, got all this information, all these pictures. He had done some work, other people had done work in the archives, in SOAS, etc. So I was able to pick up on all that information, rush through sort of almost random connections. Now you might think, okay, why are we so interested in these people? Just very, very briefly. Again, Robert Wellesley Cole, he has said in his book, he's the first Black doctor in Newcastle. Was he the first? We don't know. He did say that, he was a successful doctor because he had a white wife who liked African people. And that was what made him succeed in Newcastle. He was the first African fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons. He had a heck of a job to get it. He was turned down many, many times. He experienced a lot of racism from the medical profession, but not from the people. When they turned him down for jobs and they said, the people wouldn't like you, he said, it's not the people I'm worried about. It's my colleagues. He was in he founded societies in Newcastle. He was a member of the West African Students' Union. He was president of the League of Coloured Peoples. He was on a national scale, on an international scale. He, when they wanted to downgrade the university system in West Africa, he fought against it to say, no, we want as good a university system as the Caribbean. So somebody who is very, very important, has a lot to tell us. His sister, wonderful woman, the phrase I like best about her, I mean, I only knew so much when I met her son. And he said she pushed through in 3 years the university, the medical school at Benin University. And it was amazing to do this in 3 years. And she did it against male egos, bureaucratic obstruction, vested interest, and political sabotage. And I thought, yes. She worked in Newcastle, in the hospital. She worked during the war, in the decontamination unit. She was a great feminist. What I want to show you, and so we couldn't have done any of this without the children, without the stories of the children. So I'll just show you a little bit about the stories.
Our father, Dr. Robert Wellesley Cole,
This is his daughter.
Was a Renaissance man. He excelled both academically and professionally, and instilled in me the highest standards that I try to maintain in testament to him.
And then if this works, I will just give you a tiny bit from her son, from
an article in The Sunday Independent of December the 4th, 2005, published 10 years after her death, reminded me again how unforgettable my mother was. In it, her friend Chris Bullock described Dr. Irene Ighodaro as ever a vociferous talker and a formidable world-class public speaker who felt instinctively that all human beings should be treated as individuals and not as representatives of any group. But there were two aspects of the fight against prejudging in which she excelled. Firstly, in her sympathy, she transcended all divisions of ethnicity, nationality, and class. Secondly, she pursued a passionate quest to encourage women to take up the positions of leadership many merit.
Yep. Now, if you go on the walk, you can hear the whole thing, but you have to go on the walk, right? So that's just one strand of the sort of relationships, connections, and archives. Another one was Hannah Kent. And again, Sue, Newcastle Antiquaries was where we got that connection. So Hannah was able to lead us to Michael Yanni, who sailed on the SSS Cuba, and which was actually built in Tyneside, and who lived in West Indies House. So he came to England to help with the war effort, the Second World War. Very interesting person, because he gave two totally different stories the same year, one from the Colonial Office saying how wonderful everything was, and one by Dunbar saying the journey was crap and he was really badly treated. So just kind of interesting, even if you get the information, you have to look behind the information. And he stayed in West Indies House, which was a colonial house built for sailors in about 1942. It's where the Civic Centre is now. It was demolished in 1960. And this house, and getting the information from Hannah Kent was invaluable, because she was able to link me into the archive. She'd done so much work herself. And it was important for us to know there was actually a sailor at West Indies House. Now, let's see if I can give you. So you've got SS Cuba and West Indies House.
Report by Rodolph Dunbar, 1942, to Sir Donald Cameron of Colonial Office. Social welfare among the coloured people on the Tyneside. West Indies House at Newcastle upon Tyne is decisively impressive.
Enough. You'll have to go on the walk. Right. So West Indies House had 60 beds. It had lovely food. So the white people around were critical. Why are black sailors being treated so well? But West Indies House was a kind of what they say is almost it was an avenue for people to kind of get into, know each other. They had open days, and they had joint activities, etc. So it was a wonderful place. It didn't only have sailors. It also housed the, the British Honduran Foresters. I forgot the old-fashioned name, British Honduran Foresters. So, but through Hannah Kent, again, this is just kind of this process of discovery. She just mentioned the name in her book, in her Udo Minto. And I thought, interesting person. She talked about Colonial House, which was another colonial house in North Shields. Colonial being a kind of, what's the word? A euphemism for black. So it was a colonial house in North Shields. And this is a wonderful place. Udo Minto set it up, ran it with his wife and daughter and other people. You could see him in the picture there. It had a band. They played football. They tried to be open to everybody. And when they had the Christmas party, every black child had to bring a white child to the Christmas party. It was a very important place for socializing, but it wasn't only socializing. He challenged the union, the steward for the National Union of Seamen, who was saying only white sailors could be on the ships. He challenged him. He got jobs for people. He worked with the education to get the children into school, etc. So a really, really wonderful place. And I wouldn't have known I would have known a little about him. And these wonderful pictures are from Imperial War Museum, which Twam helped me access. So I knew about him and I wanted to know more. I found a little video on the internet from a North Shields Heritology Society. And I thought, how am I going to get in touch with this? There was no link. And I thought, I know Stuart Barlow from Lowlight, who helped us with Mary Ann Matcham. So I'll ring Stuart Barlow and see if he can help. And he did get me into Davy Young from the Heritology Society, who told me more about Udo Minto than anybody else could have. So it was just wonderful. And to get this sort of idea, first, Davy Young had all the newspaper articles. So it was a dream. So I could get all the information. He also had really significant, almost domestic detail. And for me, this picture of Mrs. Minto on the left, Edna Minto, who lived in the Ridges, which is now Meadowell, is very, very valuable, because it gives a different way of looking at this history. And this was all via Hannah Kent and via Davy Young of the Heritology Society. Moving swiftly on. So Hannah Kent and Davy Young in the newspaper articles told me about Robert how he came to fight in the war, how he couldn't get, how difficult it was for him to get enlisted. He needed Udo Minto to help him because, you know, we had Wellesley Cole, who the doctor, he tried to enlist and was ignored. We've got Ivor Cummings, who tried to enlist and was told he wasn't of British stock, white British stock, so he couldn't enlist. So this was this Robert trying really hard to enlist and Udo Minto helping him. When we wrote the book, we said, we don't know if he ever enlisted. We didn't know then. Later on, and this was via Audrey Dewdrey, who I'd known 50 years before, and who Sean Crichton put me in touch with, who gave us the information that he had enlisted. He had become ground crew in the RAF. And she also gave us lots of information about the British Honduran workers. We knew a little bit about them from Hannah Kent's book, but she told us their names, who they married, how many children they had, who lived in Newcastle. So we got that kind of detail, and in a way, and I mean, we knew how badly they were treated and stuff, so we could get that. But it's the detail that makes the people come alive, and we got that through connections and archives, that kind of scenario. Now, I've mentioned, in a sense, my journey of discovery, but in a sense, this was a lot of the project team, and all of them would have something to say about their interesting journeys of discovery. I mean, we're very grateful to Don, who did loads, but Don didn't just give us the names, he brought us the information. He did all the work and brought us the information on Fifield and on seamen. We have Pat, who did work on sports people. We had Caroline on doctors. Everybody beavered away, and it was a real team effort. But I won't tell you their stories, mostly because I don't know them. They all did. It was their work. But as well as the connections, and the connections were very closely linked to the archives, you also got a lot of help from the archives on their own, almost as a start. And this is important for me because it shows it's not just Newcastle centered, and the amount of goodwill there was. So at the very top, we have, let's see, Seaton, is it? I can remember Seaton Sluice, it's too small here. And we got that from Northumberland Archives, Malcolm Pattison, a free man of colour, who worked on the pans there in about the 1780s. And just interesting to know that not everybody came here enslaved. They were free men of colour in Northumberland. Just one person. We got more. We also got information about a music group there. Then we got information from Gateshead Libraries and Archives about Elizabeth Hunter, who was a laundress at the church there. And of course, the involvement of the church in enslavement, because she had worked, you know, her family had been enslaved by, you know, with people from that church, and how she lived in Gateshead, married, had children, etc. And then we got information about Celestine Edwards, very smart man, who was in Sunderland. He was one of the first Black editors. Again, we don't know first. It doesn't matter so much if they're first, second, third, fourth, fifth. They did wonderfully. And he's quite different in terms of he was very young. He was a preacher as well. He worked in Sunderland as a labourer. He was a lecturer as well in Sunderland. His preaching was so good that people said it in Hyde Park that, but this black man can tell us the Bible better than us. You know, what's going on here? He wrote a book. He was quite critical of, say, the black and white, you know, the black and white minstrels, and because they were there, that's when they started. He was very critical. He was critical of the invasion of Uganda, Rhodesia. He said racism started in England. It was the seed. And that was quite unusual. Not many people had the confidence to be critical of England. They could be critical of the States, but not of England. So that was quite interesting. And then this was in Newcastle Library and Archives. I was just looking at, just looking for something else. And they said, but you know, we have the records of the North East Coast exhibition. Bingo. So I got all this absolutely wonderful information on the North East Coast exhibition. This is the one in 1929, which many people have a very sort of positive idea of. But because of Wellesley Cole writing about the human zoo, and because of all the programs, I got all the information I could want on what else was happening at this exhibition. It was absolutely wonderful. 4.3 million people came, amazing, but it had a human zoo. And where, as in the program said, they said, well, you know, they have music, but it's not up to chamber concert standard. This chief is okay, but these are savages. And this was all in the amusement section of the exhibition. And to go just a step lower than these people, this is next to them. This is where the chickens are hatched. You know, so in a sense, I couldn't have got that depth from just from what Wellesley Cole had said. So, of course, on the walk, you can hear what he said. So, you know, to get that sort of information was invaluable. And we got that as a gift from all these wonderful people working in the archives. Yep. I'm rushing a bit. I hope, you know, everybody can hear. So then we thought, we're still thinking, where are the women? We need to try and get this balance a little bit better. So we thought, okay, we got doctors. And at that time, partly due to Caroline, we had a lot of women doctors. And we thought, nurses. Where's the archives with nurses? So we went to Discovery Museum and spent some time searching the archives, trying to find some nurses. Now, you couldn't use the information unless they were 100 years old, etc., etc. So it was a little bit tricky. But we got 3 wonderful clues. One, we got Lois Bowler Jones. We didn't know much about her. She was born in 1919. She worked here in the 1940s. But she lived at Colonial Student Club. And Colonial Student Club, which is near Lees's Park, was somewhere we were very interested in and wanted more information on. We thought it was only students from the university and male students, but we had a nurse, a woman with that address. So, like gold, we didn't know much about her, but we grabbed her and put her in our calendar. And then, but the name Kwame rang a bell. Kwame is a Trinidadian name. Kwame, I know, I'm from Trinidad. And her address was in San Fernando. So that's South Trinidad. Now, Pat, who's also from Trinidad, is from South Trinidad. So I said, Pat, surely you can do something here. I want to use this. So Pat got her relatives in Trinidad to phone, we still have phone books, to phone the family at that address. And the sister-in-law of Violet Silver Kwame answered the phone and said, well, my niece and Violet's daughter is in Dubai. I'll give you her connection. And then this daughter in Dubai says, my sister is in Toronto. She has the photos. I'll give you that connection. So we made the connection with the daughter and got, you know, information about her parents and lots of lovely photos. So, you know, the Sylvia Kwame married a Mr. Masakwai from Sierra Leone. They went back to, you could see she's the one black nurse there. She did her midwifery here. They went back to Sierra Leone. Then when there was the Civil War, they went to Canada and she had a great career. She co-founded the first midwifery college. She was Center of Obstetrics, so a director of obstetrics. So we got a real lot of information via, this is why it's a discovery cycle, via this kind of route. And then what had been, I suppose, kind of worrying me was, I think it was Lizzie who said they have this newspaper cutting, Nigeria Romance to City Wedding. How could we find out more about it? Well, we could find it in the archives, you could find their marriage certificates, but I didn't really want to just use that without getting perhaps permission or knowing a bit more about it. So I thought, okay, let's try. So Nigerian. So I thought, okay, let me ask some people from Nigeria who I know, do they know this name? Let's try the same thing that we did in Sierra Leone and Trinidad. Total blank. And then I said, let me go back to my friends from Sierra Leone. Do they know this name? He said, yes, 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 yes. Our parents knew their parents, right? So after a lot of false, you know, trial and error, I then found the son. Let's see. Yeah. So I got pictures of the wedding and pictures of the baby and pictures of the son's graduation, and found out, you know, a lot about this young man, about his fractured education, about how hard he had to study when he came to Newcastle, about how unwelcoming he found it, about how he set up an African Fellowship Society, how he was both a communist and a fervent Christian. You know, I just found out so much about him, how he wasn't accepted at the churches Black people weren't accepted at the churches in Newcastle, but a lecturer managed to make a connection with St. John's Church, and he was accepted there, and that he got married there. And this is the picture of the little boy in the middle, Adetonkumbo, who gave us the information. And there he is as a baby. And 73 years later, he gave us that information. And I'll just give you, you know, Victor, he went on, like so many, to do great things. He got, what did he get? A doctorate from Durham University because of his outstanding publications, a doctorate of science from Oregon State because of his incredible contribution to agriculture. And he was emeritus professor of the University of Ibadan. So he went on to do so much. And there was a book which I'll play a little bit, so I could get some information from the book, but I couldn't get a feel of what happened. I couldn't understand, but what did his mother do? You know, we know all the book was saying was about this very important professor and nothing about the mother. So I had to ask him, well, what was she doing? You know, I know she was probably doing everything so that this professor could succeed, but was she doing anything else, you know? So to get this kind of idea, so for me, it was really very important, these
From Sojourn, Emeritus Professor, V.A. Ayonunga's biography by Adebayo Adesoye. The Newcastle Chronicle carried the following headline: Nigerian romance becomes city wedding, on the front page of the newspaper, 2 weeks after the first media interview with Victor. The story was well received in Newcastle, and soon after, other newspapers, some from outside Newcastle, sent journalists to interview Victor.
Okay, I'll stop there. And again, you know, you have to come on a walk to hear the full story. Let's see. What was interesting, of course, it wasn't just local in Newcastle, it wasn't even just local in England, it actually was over there in Nigeria too, in the Church Chronicles, the wedding of the year. So we've done quite a bit on connections, relationships, and archives. Just want to touch on organizations, and so much of our members were members of Northeast of England African and Community Association, and so many of them got the information that is in the booklet, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. But, you know, there were so many organizations that contributed, not just the big three that we spoke about first, sort of the low light in North Shields, the Heritology Society, Newcastle Guide, Pat Lowry, helped us when we were designing the walk. Let's see, students from Purdue University who were on placement at Northumbria University, with the support of the lecturers at Northumbria University, did the online prototypes on which we based the walk. So we were really well supported by many, many organizations, of which this is one. So after organizations, we're going, if you think of that cycle, we moved to publications. So I think in last year, maybe 2023, 2022, I've been, of course, stayed in touch with the CREO organization and many others. So for International Nurses Day, they put the picture from our calendar on their website. So then we got, you remember Lois Bowler Jones, who I knew very little about? Her niece and her nephew responded and said, that's our auntie. She died now. She died at 85 in 2005. We didn't know, hadn't got a date of death for her. She was a matron of the a hospital for under fives in Freetown. She didn't marry. She had 5 sisters, and she had loads and loads of nieces and nephews, and she loved them. She was very firm, but she was very loving, and she worked returned to Sierra Leone and worked diligently. And that is just gold, really, getting that information from what's on the calendar. We also got a little bit more about the Kwame. Somebody said, oh, they had fantastic parties. The children didn't tell us that. Perhaps they didn't know that. And so this is, in a sense, how the publication sort of move things on. We then had, via NECA, we got information on Abladi, who was, let's see, director of radio and electronics officer on Ghana's Black Star. So he was in here. And then somebody emailed and said, why have you got Abladi and you haven't got Apoma? I said, well, I don't know him. Give me the information. He was in the Black Star line as well, and he was director of operations. And like Abladi, he had been at South Shields Maritime College. And so we said, okay, got the information. And so we've got that information. So it's how the publications themselves lead to more information and to more connections. So somebody's contacted me and said, okay, we're hoping to do a film on Udo Minto, such a wonderful life. And somebody else says, oh, we want to know what happened to Mary Ann Matcham before she came to North Shields. How was the life like in Virginia? Can we find out more? I think I might go at somebody from the BBC. I might try and do some more research on that. So it's in a sense that it doesn't stop. It continues the cycle of publications. And now what I've got here is the, I don't know how I can, anyway, we'll figure this out. So I've got here the current members. I mean, we still have the support of the wider group, but these are the people who've actively beavered away to try and find information for the walk and for the website. And I very much want to acknowledge, let's see, Historic England, Vicky Angel and Katmat have their marvelous, marvelous skills, and also Nikki Waters in terms of creating both the walks and the website. We provided some information and some perspective, and they just did a brilliant job at getting us here. So what I want to talk about is very quickly how we want you to get involved in. I mean, other people have, we've had somebody on the walk who said, I was there when Martin Luther King did his talk. And somebody else said, I was one of the children who greeted Muhammad Ali. So it's how things just continue and continue. And we want you to be part of that continuing and continuing. So what we have here is incomplete narratives. And we've got somewhere that, which I probably wouldn't be able to manage to show you on here, where you give us perhaps your name and any information you have that we can then follow up. So we've got this whole section on incomplete narratives help. And we really want you to be involved in that. And then we've got this other section on, just on how to contact us. So there's 3 people, and it has all the details how to contact us, because we think that is so important in terms of moving forward. In closing, I want to acknowledge the group of people who contributed, all the supporting organizations, particularly I think Newcastle Antiquaries and Simon, Historic England, everybody. But I want to thank you in honoring, and I feel in a sense, I am thanking you for being here. I am thanking the group and the organizations who contributed to this. And when I was writing it, I was thinking of, again, you have to come on the walk, Martin Luther King's speech, when he said, in honoring me, you're not only honoring me, you're honoring all the people who have contributed to this. So for me, I think in a sense, in inviting me, in giving me your attention, you are in a sense honoring all those people, all those organizations who contributed to this work. So that's me finished, and everything's more or less worked. Thank you very much indeed.